Lupin the Third Part 2, also originally known simply as Lupin the Third in Japan, but now referred to as New Lupin the Third to avoid confusion with Part 1, is the second Lupin anime TV series airing from October 1977 to October 1980. Consisting of 155 episodes across 4 seasons, it is the longest running Lupin series to date, and the first to be produced after Tokyo Movie was restructured into Tokyo Movie Shinsha, or TMS for short. With a rotating list of directors and writers taking the helm for each episode, the series had a lighter, zanier tone than Part 1 while maintaining some of the adult edge that audiences had come to expect from Lupin. By the time this show debuted, the manga was already 10 years old and likely would have been familiar to any discerning manga reader in Japan. Part 1 may not have been a success as it aired, but its popularity in reruns convinced TMS to produce another animated TV series. This was the first anime to feature Lupin's red jacket, which has now become his most iconic look. To go on a bit of a tangent here, you'll often hear people describing different Lupin projects by the jacket color. Part 1 is often referred to as Green Jacket, while Part 2, of course, is nicknamed Red Jacket. It's not just a representation of the outfit, but also a way for people to offhandedly summarize the tone of the series or movie it's attached to. Green Jacket generally signifies a more adult version of Lupin, while Red Jacket represents a more carefree and spirited character. It's generally decent for creating simple categorizations for Lupin stories, but it's not entirely reliable, and I find it's best to instead analyze the tone of each adventure individually. That's why for the majority of this retrospective series, I'm not really going off the jacket color system as I find it a little too arbitrary, just in case any of you were wondering. But back to Part 2, Atsushi Yamatoya, who wrote for Part 1, worked on the series composition this time in addition to writing some screenplays. A number of people took charge writing and directing each episode, with a few notable ones including Sherlock Hound director Kyosuke Mikuriya, Doraemon movie writer Noboru Shiroyama, Disney cartoon series director Yasumi Mikamoto, Lupin Part 3 writer Yutaka Kaneko, Lupin Part 1 writer Kiyoshi Miyata, Legend of the Gold of Babylon co-director Shigetsugu Yoshida, and even Hayao Miyazaki returning for 2 episodes, though that's just scratching the surface. While TMS was still involved with the animation, it outsourced work to multiple other animation studios, including its then new subsidiary, Telecom Animation Film. Telecom would go on to animate Parts 4 and 5, Fuma Conspiracy, Farewell to Nostradamus, and the Takeshi Koike trilogy, and they're also currently working on the Shenmue anime set to debut this year. Nippon Television broadcasted the show in Japan, beginning a long-running relationship with the series as it would broadcast every Lupin television project going forward except for Part 3. According to Nippon producer Seiji Takahashi, Part 2 was aimed at a high school audience, specifically between the ages of 12 to 18, allowing them to keep some of the mature storytelling from Part 1 while also going in a more varied and wild direction. That's evident as soon as you watch a couple of episodes of Part 1, as because of the large number of writers and directors on board, it is the most inconsistent Lupin media in terms of tone. Just about every episode has a different style depending on who's behind it, and it's also a lot more experimental with structure and mood, going in directions the Lupin franchise hadn't yet explored. You've still got a ton of straightforward heist stories or character studies exploring the main cast or putting them in situations that threaten their core beliefs, but there's tons of wacky, confusing, and sometimes downright ludicrous plots in here as well. One episode might be a gritty crime drama focusing on interpersonal relationships, and the next might be a bizarre fantasy adventure that completely disregards reality. Unlike Part 1, which was mostly pretty grounded despite some fantasy elements, Part 2 features a lot of supernatural, science fiction, and mythology-based storylines, and overall a much more cartoonish vibe. It stands out in retrospect, as a lot of Lupin adventures after this aren't so out there as these episodes, and it's certainly not going to be to everyone's taste, though some of these far-out stories work better than others. The show also contains a number of pop culture references in it, some of which are lost in translation, as the humor doesn't work as well in English as it does in Japanese. Though there is stuff with universal appeal, with a few episodes referencing Superman, a plot centered around space invaders, and even a crossover with the contemporary anime Rose of Versailles. A lot of dialogue in Part 2 contains homages to the real world, with popular products, locations, and current events getting a nod, sometimes skewing their names a bit to avoid any legal trouble. Many Lupin adventures from this point on, especially beginning in the 80s, feel more tied to a past rather than trying to capture the spirit of the day, but Part 2 is very late 70s in its content. But it's done in a way that doesn't feel dated most of the time, but rather classical, with the broad strokes of the plot lines usually being pretty timeless with a couple of exceptions. You truly never know what you're going to get with a Part 2 episode until it begins, with many going off the rails in either a delightful or baffling manner, and sometimes a blend of both, that makes it quite the roller coaster of a series. Yet it's simultaneously one of the more formulaic animated projects because this is where a lot of the elements that define anime Lupin began. Unlike Part 1, this show found many more uses for each of the 5 main characters in just about every single episode throughout the entire series. Almost every episode has a woman for Lupin to fawn over, Fujiko or otherwise, a scene of Jigen complaining to Lupin about the mission of the day, a reason for Fujiko to betray Lupin, something that Goemon needs to cut, and Zenigata having some scheme to capture Lupin. More than any prior installment, Part 2 really emphasizes the idea of the Lupin gang, in the sense that these 4 thieves always operate together even if they occasionally hang back when they decide a job isn't worth it. For some stories, you can tell that the writers really couldn't think of a natural way to get all these characters involved in the plot. Perhaps this is emphasized by the fact that I studied several episodes of this show each day while watching it for this video, but it's something I couldn't help but notice and honestly be somewhat bothered by. I'm sure watching this one episode a week back in 1977 was a much better way to experience Part 2, but I had to digest it all quickly, so sue me. This show also solidified the character traits that have become the stock characterizations for the Lupin gang, more so than the manga or Part 1. Lupin retains the mischievous horniness of the manga, but it's portrayed in a different light, with the other characters, whether it be Jigen, Goemon, or Fujiko, or whoever the object of his affection is, either criticizing him, striking him down, or flat out ignoring his advances. Depending on the episode, Lupin displays varying degrees of intelligence and seriousness, though in nearly every case, he's able to outwit his enemy. Yasuo Yamada's performance here is fantastic, as he perfectly balances every aspect of the character while keeping the same charming flair he developed in Part 1. Jigen definitely fell into the role of Lupin's trusted partner rather than the more subservient role he took in Part 1 and Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. He's far rougher than he was in the Part 1 days, with his misogynistic tendencies and grumpy attitude especially making a mark here, but he still maintains the charm and coolness that you've come to expect from him. With that comes a fantastic performance by Kiyoshi Kobayashi as he comes to inhabit the Jigen we all know and love. Fujiko is perhaps the most constricted of the main cast in Part 2, as in every episode she'll always betray Lupin to try and grab a treasure for herself and or get captured by the villain in an attempt to lure Lupin into a trap. It never feels like the writers ever know what to do with her in this show, and so just put her in the standard Fujiko plotlines each time. But it is great seeing her wearing a ton of different outfits, as I've always liked that aspect of her design compared to the main male trio's more static wardrobing, especially as it's a great look back at 70s fashion. Eiko Masuyama, previously known for voicing Cutie Honey and for playing Fujiko in the pilot films, returned for Part 2 and stayed with the series for every project except Fuma Conspiracy until retiring from the role in 2012. There's more playfulness to this Fujiko than Yukiko Nikaido's portrayal, matching her manipulative side as she is much more apt to use her feminine charms to her benefit here, and Masuyama hits that very well. Goemon falls into a similar role as he did in Part 1, where he more or less just kinda shows up to use his Zantetsuken sword or provide some sage, stoic wisdom to the rest of the group. Rarely does he become the center of attention, and even when he gets a spotlight episode, it's usually in relation to some other character who pushes against Goemon's rigid, unwavering calmness. I profess to not being as huge a Goemon fan as I am with the other characters, so perhaps it's my personal feelings getting in the way, but I find that he rarely shines in this series. He's not usually the most interesting part of the story, even if he's the main character. But I can say that his voice by Captain Harlock actor Makio Inoue is absolutely wonderful, hitting his stern, unflinching personality flawlessly. Inoue also voiced Goemon in every subsequent Lupin adventure, except Fuma Conspiracy, until leaving the role in 2012, and he's a big part in what makes Goemon a good character, even for someone like me. Then there's Zenigata, who, out of all the characters, perhaps ramped up the comedic aspects the most compared to Part 1, although nowhere near the levels of Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. He's still just as dedicated to capturing Lupin, but in a more insane way than previously depicted. This Zenigata shows a wider range of emotion, still shouting a lot and often being very serious, but also being far more cocky, scheming, and joyous than before, essentially a Wile E. Coyote to Lupin's Roadrunner. While Part 2 isn't always consistent with Zenigata, sometimes making him a little too goofy, he's still a memorable presence here thanks once again to Goro Naya's fantastic portrayal. It's awesome hearing these actors come into their roles here, and they do a lot of work in making Part 2 an enjoyable watch, especially as the animation doesn't always match that range. Depending on the key animators and studios in charge, the animation quality can vary wildly, but in a lot of cases, especially in the earlier episodes, Part 2 often looks pretty lifeless and static. I don't want to judge too harshly because TMS wasn't in the best financial position at this time and the adult animation industry was still burgeoning in the 70s, but still, it's something that I can't just ignore. Errors with repeating backgrounds are a common occurrence and are often extremely noticeable even if you're not looking for them, and yes, I know this happened in Part 1 as well, but in my opinion, it's more egregious here. The character animation is sometimes incredibly stiff, especially in quieter scenes that feature more dialogue and little action, but even some earlier action scenes can be very stilted. This show has more of a Saturday morning cartoon vibe, so perhaps the more limited animation is to be expected, and to be fair, when the visuals are on point, they're definitely a sight to behold. An aspect that's consistently amazing throughout the series, though, is the music by Yuji Ono, as Part 2 marks his first involvement with the series. If you're not familiar with Ono, he's a fantastic talent, and his work on this series is a defining element of its style going forward. Ono's jazz background carries into a lot of these tracks, with a mix of high and low energy tunes depending on the mood and tempo of the scene. Most songs emphasize brass and drums alongside other traditional jazz instruments backing them up, though some character themes go for different instrumentation based on their personality and background. Many tracks and compositions that future projects reuse originated here, with Spiral Flight, Tornado, Magnum Dance, and Sambo Temporado being my personal favorites. But you can't talk about Yuji Ono without mentioning the famous Lupin theme that any series fan will gush about forever. It's a rollicking, lively composition that isn't just catchy, but perfectly captures the sense of adventure and fun thrills that await you. It absolutely deserves its iconic status, and if you take nothing else away from this video, I highly encourage you to listen to the numerous versions of the theme that Ono has recorded over the years. Of course, there's the original, also referred to as Lupin the Third Theme 78, which acts as the first opening theme to Part 2, but some other favorite renditions of mine include Lupin the Third Theme 80, Part 2's fourth opening theme, Lupin the Third Theme 89, which can be heard on a lot of early TV specials, the 2011 action version from Blood Seal of the Eternal Mermaid, and Lupin the Third Theme 2021, which is being used as the opening for Part 6. A lot of Ono's Lupin soundtracks and standalone albums were recently added to streaming services, so if you want to hear his work, and I highly recommend you do, you can check them out there. It's interesting how often and how intensely Part 2 can fluctuate, because especially when you're taking it all in once, like I did, it can give you a ton of mood, pacing, and quality whiplash. So many of the stories in Part 2 are so different from each other in multiple ways that on occasion it feels like you're jumping between different shows. But perhaps that also speaks to Part 2's strength. It covers so many bases while still keeping close to a shared identity that it appeals to a wider audience. Perhaps not wholly, but there's something here for everybody. I'm not always a fan of what Part 2 does, and to be honest, some of what I believe are the worst Lupin stories are present here, but inversely, it also contains some of the franchise's strongest stuff. That could be what made Part 2 so successful, as while it is experimental in many ways, it also sticks to a simple yet enjoyable formula. No matter what direction the story would go in, there are enough satisfying elements to keep audiences in Japan coming back. Had it not done so well, it's likely that Lupin as it exists today, at least in anime form, wouldn't have happened, and that's an impressive legacy. It's not just responsible for affirming Lupin's popularity in Japan though, as this is the series that also helped introduce American audiences to Lupin. The history of Lupin English dubs is very much a story in and of itself, with a few early dubs created for niche applications rather than a wider release. There's the Mystery of Mamo dub by Toho and Frontier, created for Japanese airlines, which I'll cover in that video, but there was also the arcade game Cliffhanger, a laserdisc game that used footage from Castle of Cagliostro and Mystery of Mamo to tell a unique story. The dub itself is, frankly, very poor, with awful line delivery and especially a terrible voice for Jigen, but considering this was made for an arcade game that takes 15 minutes to beat, you wouldn't exactly expect quality. But then you had STREAMLINE Pictures, which released a dub of Cagliostro and, more importantly for this video, a VHS release circa 1994 called Tales of the Wolf, also known as Lupin the Third's Greatest Capers. This is a compilation of the 2 Miyazaki-directed episodes that reused the cast from its Cagliostro dub, with Lupin's name changed to Wolf to, as you might guess, avoid infringing on the LeBlanc Estate's Lupin copyright. The Miyazaki episodes were chosen because of the director's rising fame, and STREAMLINE was banking on that being enough to push sales. This dub was adapted and directed by Carl Macek, a controversial yet no doubt influential figure in anime dubbing, with dialogue written by Gregory Snegov and story editing by the legendary Fred Patton. These dubs are pretty decent, and the adaptation, while not always faithful to the original dialogue, still tells the story alright. Bob Bergen as Lupin pulls a lot of the weight here, matching Miyazaki's more charming and kind-hearted version of Lupin very well. We'll talk more about the STREAMLINE dub in later videos, but it would have been interesting to see them adapt more episodes of Part 2. STREAMLINE was pushing for the rights to a 3rd episode, but TMS instead wanted the entire series dubbed, and STREAMLINE couldn't afford that, so the company left it at these 2 adventures. Tales of the Wolf was a moderate success, and is how many in the West were introduced to Lupin, but Part 2 would later be the first Lupin media to hit American airwaves as well. This came courtesy of Pioneer Studios, who licensed the series with the intention of broadcasting it on TV in the United States, ultimately picking Part 2 over Part 1 because its lighter tone would be easier to market. Fuse produced the dub under license from Pioneer, who would later be sold to GENEON and is now known as NBC Universal Entertainment Japan. Eureka Araki worked as the translator, with Darlene Lacey handling ADR scripting and Grant Moran writing the English dialogue. The dub premiered at Anime Expo 2002 in Long Beach via a short preview clip which received a positive reception, and the following year it would grace the small screen courtesy of Adult Swim.
Larceny, depravity, immoral behavior, all in a good day's work. But this thief's a gentleman.
You know you want me.
Well, sort of.
Excuse me.
Bikini Inspector.
I got a pair of pretty bracelets with your name on them, Lupin.
Lupin the Third. Tonight at midnight. When you're this smooth, everything's free.
Let the good times roll on.
Adult Swim aired the first 27 episodes in 2003 under the title of Lupin the Third, and over the next few years, Pioneer would release the first 79 episodes of the show on DVD over 15 volumes. Unfortunately, the company lost the license before it could release the remainder of the series, and to this day, the remaining episodes haven't been dubbed with the exception of STREAMLINE's Miyazaki episodes. This dub has received criticism because of its script, which included a ton of random pop culture references and topical, at the time, jokes not present in the original Japanese script. This was apparently a decision from the higher-ups who wanted to modernize Part 2 a bit despite the then 25-year-old animation, and not everyone on the crew was necessarily a fan of it. I understand this hesitation, as personally, I would have advocated for sticking closer to the original script as well, and in a lot of cases, I find that the dub does go a little too off the rails in both writing and acting. For what it's worth, I think Grant Moran did a good job with the dialogue given the task at hand, and at the very least, it makes the dub an interesting watch in comparison. But it's the voices of the main cast that really makes this version work, as it's the first Lupin media to feature, in my opinion, the perfect dub cast. The Pioneer GENEON cast, as it's occasionally referred to, began voicing in the Lupin series here, and it's easy to see why most of these actors continue to work on Lupin dubs even to this day, including a brand new dub for Part 1, which is currently being released on High Dive as I make this video. Tony Oliver, who's also famous for playing Rick Hunter in Robotech and Lancer in Fate Stay Night, voiced Lupin, and is, in my eyes, a phenomenal Lupin, hitting the right balance of smarminess, silliness, and tenderness that you expect from the character. Richard Epcar, the voice of Jigen and the dub's director, is also great, getting his rougher, wearier personality across very well, though that's not a shock considering Epcar's experience with characters like old Joseph Joestar in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Raiden from Mortal Kombat. Michelle Ruff, whom you might know as Rukia Kochiki in Bleach or Jill Valentine in Resident Evil, nails a lot of different notes as Fujiko, being alternatively alluring, pouting, commanding, and doting depending on the scene, and she's very good in the role. Goemon's portrayal by Lex Lang, also known for playing Saguro Sanosuke from Rurouni Kenshin and Dr. Cortex from Crash Bandicoot, awesomely reflects the unwavering fortitude and wisdom that the character is so famous for. Finally, we have Zenigata, played by Dan Lorge, who voiced Henya Kariwa in Rurouni Kenshin and is now more of an acting teacher, and his Zenigata is the best thing ever. It's an amazing combination of silly, stern, and gruff that's instantly memorable, if somewhat initially off-putting. The main cast is certainly up to snuff, but for the side characters it's so-so. Many of them have ridiculous and in some cases stereotypic accents that unfortunately don't really hold up that well, making what are otherwise more straightforward characters in the Japanese version completely different caricatures. It's not a huge problem, but it does keep the dub from being consistently enjoyable sometimes. What it does make for, however, is very hilarious out-of-context clip compilations, which you can find a number of on YouTube, and I recommend you do so if you're not familiar with the series. It gives you somewhat of an expectation as to what Lupin Part 2 is all about, there's tons of both intentional and unintentional humor, and it's a decent entry point into the series, believe it or not. But whether you go with the dub or the original Japanese language, I can still highly recommend Part 2 to anyone who wants to check out the franchise if you haven't already. It's a great way to start watching the series, and even when it's not that good story-wise, it is at least consistently intriguing and often very engaging. Now, Part 2 has a lot of episodes, and as I've said, it can leap and dip heavily in terms of quality, so if you don't want to watch the entire series, which episodes should you definitely check out? Well, for all the Lupin TV shows, I'm listing my favorite episodes, and for Part 2, I've got 40 that I think are worth watching. Disclaimer, I made these judgments based on the Japanese audio rather than the English dub, so without further ado, let's explore these highlights. 1. Lupin the Third's gallant appearance. Admittedly, this episode is kinda silly, but it makes for a great introduction, and I love seeing the characters interact with each other after years apart. Plus, it's a nice continuation from Part 1, as it's one of the few episodes to share continuity with that show. 5. I'll teach you how to transport gold bars. This is the kind of wacky adventure that Part 2 excels at, with an intriguing MacGuffin and an incredibly fun chase that takes up the bulk of the episode, with a decent mix of fun and tension. 9. Would you like Ikiyoe Blues? A more tender and sensitive side of Lupin here, taking pity on a dying old man and fulfilling his last request, while still being an absolute blast with its hijinks, with one scene involving the gang fooling Zenigata being the absolute highlight. 10. Steal the File M123. Very rarely do the stakes in Part 2 feel more intense than they do here, by putting Lupin in a life or death situation which, while it doesn't stop the episode from being fun, makes for a wonderfully intense watch. 15. Renowned Detectives in the Sky. It doesn't exactly have a surprising twist, and the new characters aren't spectacular, but it is very entertaining seeing Zenigata unravel the mystery, and the setting of a giant zeppelin is a nice change of pace. 19. Can the 10-year vault be broken? I love this one not just for the premise, but also for how it pushes Lupin to the breaking point regarding his stubbornness and cockiness, bringing him past the point of comfort and making for a purposefully stressful watch. 20. Cornered Lupin. I'm not a huge fan of the villain as a comedic pastiche of Hitler, but the rest of the episode is fantastic. It's a fairly powerful survival episode that mostly takes place in one location, with, as the episode implies, Lupin being caught in a dangerous situation. 21. Goemon's Revenge. As I said, Goemon doesn't often make a good impression in Part 2, but this one is a fantastic Goemon episode with darker action blended with a middle section that's a lovely brigade of crazy antics. 24. The Phantom Thief Rat Boy appears. Yet another great Goemon episode with him teaming up with an enjoyable character of the week. While this is a little more standard in its structure, it's a lot of fun, especially in the competitiveness between Goemon and Lupin. 25. Encounter with the Deadly Iron Lizard. Some of the better Part 2 episodes are elongated chase sequences like this one, as the majority is Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon outrunning a deadly missile, which makes for a tense and enjoyable episode based on a classic manga chapter. 30. The Wind in Morocco is Hot. Lupin and Zenigata team-up episodes are always a treat, and their relationship in this one single-handedly makes this one worth a watch, though the animation led by Lupin Part 3's director Yuzo Aoki is also spectacular. 32. Lupin Dies Twice. This episode shows how much the main cast cares about each other and how, when they're in serious danger, they want to protect each other. It's a surprisingly wholesome story in a way, even if it ends as you'd expect. 33. To Whom Orion's Crown Belongs. This one is a fun game of back and forth between two sides of a gang war caught up in the Lupin crew's intervention, a great way for the protagonists to insert themselves into a seemingly unrelated story and make it work. 38. The Sweet Trap of ICPO. This episode focused centrally on a Lupin vs Fujiko conflict that actually explores their relationship really nicely. I like seeing these two in a more antagonistic relationship with each other, despite them wanting to go back to their expected roles. 40. Operation Missilejack. You're immediately aware of the payoff for this episode right from the start, and it's still an incredibly engaging episode to watch with a ton of build up to an exciting finale and lots of great content in the middle to keep you glued to the screen. 48. Lupin laughs at the alarm bell. Sometimes the best episodes are the most simple, and this one's a great example of that idea. It's basically a typical Lupin heist that's done very well, with a great story piece in the form of an alarmed floor that Lupin needs to overcome. 52. Emmanuelle whispers like an angel. One of the most sensual episodes of the series, with a great female character of the week that provides a nice contrast to the standard Lupin-Fujika relationship, culminating in an enjoyable confrontation between the two ladies. 55 and 56, Shower of Cherry Blossoms Mysterious Gang of Five. This two-parter features a great set of new characters and a nice Goemon storyline that leads up to one of the single best sequences of the entire show, with the Lupin gang partaking in a kabuki-style introduction. 57, Computer or Lupin. More amazing Lupin Zenigata action here that's an interesting way of demonstrating how competent Pops can be when he sets his mind to it. It's very much his episode in the first half, and it leads to a great finale. 58, The Face of Goodbye at the National Border. One of the best Jigen stories in the entire series, and a fantastic piece of drama. There's not a lot of Lupin hijinks, but there's a ton of suspense and an engaging relationship between Jigen and Monica that's portrayed very seriously. 66, Order Shoot to Kill. This is one of the darkest episodes in the series with more realistic violence, but it's a very cool storyline. It gives me a lot of Part 1 vibes with its story of an assassin hunting after Lupin, even with the Zenigata stuff bringing in the comedy. 69, The Woman Pops Fell in Love With. The perfect episode for Zenigata lovers like myself, with a more serious tone and a shockingly depressing ending, and I gotta say, seeing a vulnerable Zenigata here is absolutely captivating, with some more great Yuzo Aoki animation to boot. 73, Through Flowers or Storms, The Thieves Race. An extremely fun episode with speed racer-like shenanigans that's so enthralling that I actually don't mind the villain being kinda weak, also coincidentally one of the few recurring foes in Part 2. 82, Rescuing Pops. It's silly but very enjoyable, but the highlight is hearing how Lupin and Zenigata feel about each other, as it shows their mutual respect and admiration, and it's also great at showing the unbreakable friendships between the Lupin gang. 85, The ICPO's Secret Plan. Another very good Zenigata episode that puts him in a more subservient role as he gains a new superior who starts to form a romantic subplot for Pops. It's got a decent character of the week and a very good trap that the Lupin gang has to escape. 98, The Day Pops Was Gone. Okay, one more Zenigata storyline, but this one's absolutely phenomenal. More darker and violent stuff here, but it's heartwarming how Lupin acts on Zenigata's behalf with awesome chemistry between them in the final moments. 99, The Scattered Magnum. Yet another incredible Jigen story with a great villain, amazing animation by Telecom, and a great intersection between the stories. And this episode's also notable for being the first anime broadcast in stereo sound, which is pretty cool. 109, Lupin's Toughest Fight Ever. I don't know why I really like episodes where the gang are pursued by assassins, but this one works very well, with a great use of its villains and very nice visuals in the climax, with the Hall of Mirrors making for a great final act. 112, Goemon's Close Call. More awesome villains here, intimidating in how ruthless they are and how they're played completely seriously, and it's awesome seeing Goemon's resolve as he's being tortured. It's a great demonstration of the friendship between him and Lupin. 121, The Treasure My Grandfather Left Behind. Another episode adapted from a manga chapter that's really just kind of a nice adventure. The stuff they added to meet the episode runtime works very well, and when it gets to the main treasure, it's a good comedic heist scene. 132, The Himalayan Holy Mountain Thieves Cult. Good villains can make or break a Lupin the Third episode, and once again, I have to praise them here. It makes for a good battle of wits between them and the Lupin gang, and they've got an evil scheme that makes for a good conflict. 134, The Climactic Lupin Arrest Operation. I completely forgot about this episode before rewatching this show, and I'm only now discovering how good it is. It's awesome seeing how over the top Zenigata gets in capturing Lupin, and this might have even worked for a series finale. 137, The Magnificent Team Play Operation. It's a fantastic adaptation of a fantastic manga chapter. The added stuff is a ton of fun, and the dynamics between the protagonists are some of the best in the entire series, with one extended comedy scene in particular being a blast. 141, 1980 Moscow Revelation. Another example of the simpler episodes working the best. It's really just a solid adventure with some good characters, a decently enjoyable treasure and heist, and a lot of good build-up to an enjoyable climax. 143, The Miami Bank Raid Anniversary. It's got wonderful telecom animation, and it's also a very fun heist. It's nice to see Lupin go back to thievery basics by stealing from a bank vault, even if the impetus behind it is very different in a good way. 145, Wings of Death Albatross. Hands down my favorite Part 2 episode, and the first of Miyazaki's contributions. It has awesome set pieces, with the plane battle being an absolute delight, great designs, and fantastic direction as you'd expect from this legendary creator. 148, the target is 555 meters. There's a lot of good solid heist action here. It's light on character study, but a great demonstration of each character's capabilities, which, while it's weird that it happens so late in the series, is still an enjoyable episode. 151, the Arrest Lupin Highway Operation. Most of this episode is a car chase on a highway, and it's one of the best action scenes in the entire series. Car chases usually are a highlight anyway, and in this one, having it take up the bulk of the adventure makes it quite a gem. And 155, Farewell My Beloved Lupin. The second Miyazaki episode, and while not quite as tight as Albatross, it is a very lovely episode. Plus it's cool seeing designs that Miyazaki would reuse for Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and Castle in the Sky appear. And that's 40 Lupin the Third Part 2 episodes that I think are worth a watch. There's plenty of others I could talk about, but this is a good batch that features a decent spread across all 4 seasons. If you want to condense this list down to a single season length, here's the 24 highlights of this list that anyone would enjoy. And of course, here's my 16 runner-up episodes as well. A number of Part 2 episodes are pretty middling, and some are just straight up bad, but when the series gets good, it can produce some of the absolute finest adventures in the Lupin series. Which is how I feel about Part 2 in general. It's not always interesting or entertaining, but there are so many episodes that deliver the comedy, antics, drama, and character relations that I've come to love in Lupin. Despite its inconsistent quality, I've come to really appreciate Part 2 for its high points and for introducing a lot of the elements of Lupin that I adore. It's why I consider it my favorite Lupin TV series, even if it's not as uniformly satisfying as some other Lupin projects. But during its broadcast, Lupin finally made the animated leap onto the big screen with 2 movies, Mystery of Mamo and Castle of Cagliostro, which I'll cover in the next 2 videos, and man, I cannot wait to revisit these. Real quick before the video ends, I just want to thank a couple of people. First, I want to thank the Lupin the Third Reddit community and everyone on Twitter who have been very supportive of this project so far, especially regarding the copyright issues I dealt with. I also want to thank Darlene Lacey, who was kind enough to answer my questions about the dub and grant me some insights into its creation. Finally, I want to thank all of you for your kind words regarding my battle with Bell's palsy, which temporarily prevented me from working on new videos. I'm still recovering from it, which you may have been able to tell, but my voice is getting better, enough so that I'm comfortable recording it again at least. Hopefully it'll go away quickly so I can get back into the full swing of video making soon, but we'll just have to wait and see. And of course, I also want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then give it a like, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe to see more Cloud Connection videos. It's great to head back into Lupin again after a little break to prepare for this video, and we'll be going over a bunch of awesome stuff this year. Until then, this is Cloud Connection signing off.